Thank you very much, and it's great to see so many people, and I appreciate the time that I've had with some of the faculty, particularly those who were here when I was here. You know who you are. Thank you. So, when I first walked through that door, the world was a different place. It doesn't seem that long ago, but Germany was divided, the Berlin Wall was up, there were no smartphones, there was certainly no Facebook. If you graduated and you wanted to stay in touch with your roommate, you'd have to write a letter, or maybe hope they were home and call. The world has changed quite a bit. I think tuition was $5,000 that first year. Everything else was cheaper as well. A gallon of milk was probably 79 cents. Gasoline, I do remember when I first got my car, was 79 cents a gallon. So things have changed very rapidly. We've had economies emerge, and I talked about this with those of you who were in the classes that I spoke with. There were 4 classes, and we talked a little bit about the changing world and our global economy, and we talked about some things about my career and misconceptions about Islam in the Middle East, which is something I'm passionate about addressing, and we talked about economics and business and how I started my firm and things like that. So I guess what that leaves, so I don't repeat myself to those who saw me speak already, is probably some of the most important things that if I were to speak to you and say, what can I make most valuable for you in this short time that I have, to boil down anything that I've learned over the years. And that would probably come in the area of economics. And that may put some people to sleep to say, oh, economics, it could be boring, but maybe not. Economics really makes the world go around. Everything that is a major issue that has happened in the world, anything we study in history, everything we're looking at in today's current events has an economic undertone. The decisions about who is rich and who is poor, and who will live and who will die, all come back to economics. Slavery is driven by economics. War is almost always driven by economics. Economics drives where these imaginary lines are placed on a map, which decide what country someone is in. A piece of dirt here or a piece of dirt there can mean the difference between you living or dying. It can mean the difference between you being rich or poor. Those lines are driven often by economic motivation. So, if I were to think about this career that I've had in studying economics and learning about the world and trying to understand global change and try to understand what has happened, to try and boil down what is the most important thing that I've learned. And I'm always learning more, so maybe this opinion will change, and hopefully I'll learn more and change as time goes on. Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer, said that a man who has the same opinions at age 50 as he did at age 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. So, the biggest lessons that I've learned in this journey about thinking about economics are the questions that economists and other people have been thinking about for many, many years. It's the nature of what is force and what is our right to have voluntary trade between one another. That's the core of economics. It's, I want to sell my product, you want to buy my product, we can agree on a price together. It seems pretty simple. That's voluntary trade. But most of what we see in the world is not voluntary. So there's been this age-old question, especially in the last many decades, last 60 years or so, where people have been trying to ask these questions about saying, where's the balance about what kind of freedom do you have to make these kind of exchanges? It seems simple. At first we say, well, sure, anybody can sell anything to anybody, right? That's not the way reality works. There are a lot of forces that prevent people from doing what they want. So I spend a lot of time thinking, as I think about how is our world changing and what is going on, I think a lot about what is the place of others to interfere with what we may have as a voluntary transaction between us. And as I've traveled around the world and been fortunate enough to meet kings and princes and presidents and billionaires and world leaders, I've thought a lot about these questions, about who has the right to tell us how to trade and what we can do. And in that, I've come up with, it's not a unique philosophy, but I've come up with my own thinking. And I have this simple little rule, and I say, no human has the right to harm another human unless it's in defense, or unless that human has harmed someone else. No one has a right to harm someone else unless they are threatened or unless that person has done harm. That sounds simple enough. 99% of the people in the world, if you say, no, of course, Bruce, of course. Of course people shouldn't harm others. That's common sense. My little children know that. You don't hurt somebody unless they hurt you. But in reality, that's not what we practice in our world. Because it's too easy for governments and other people to come in and interfere with that voluntary relationship. It's too easy for them to say, let's make an exception. Let's make an exception for the greater good. Let's say, okay, we're going to violate this rule in exchange for the greater good. Which, by the way, is the rallying cry of all tyranny and all evil in history. It's always marketed as being for the greater good. So my personal philosophy says you don't have the right to harm another unless they harm you or another person. Again, it sounds simple. Do we do that in America? Not close. Not close to true. 330,000 people are in cages, in prisons, many of them for profit, for non-violent, victimless crimes, usually drug crimes. Now there are drug crimes which have victims. There are drug dealers who kill people. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about non-violent and victimless crimes. People who simply had possession of drugs or were involved in trafficking. 3,200 of those people will die behind bars. They have life imprisonment for non-violent victimless crimes. I hate drugs. I've never done any drug. I was thinking about speakers that I saw here when I sat where you were sitting, and some of the great speakers were anti-drug speakers. It's not my expertise or forte. If it was, I would agree with them and say drugs are a dead-end road. I hate drugs. But I don't feel that I have the moral right and the moral authority to harm another human being who has not harmed me. I don't feel that I have the right to cage somebody or kill somebody for something that they have done which has not harmed me. That's my own simple set of rules. You don't have to copy what mine is. You may have a different set. Some people have a pure pacifist rule set where they say you never harm anybody no matter what. And they'll let somebody kill them if they have to. I don't agree with that personally. If somebody was going to do harm to me, I would harm them if I had to. Other people have a different set of rules, and I would urge you, as you are in your formative years as young adults, to think about these questions and think, what is the rule system you have? Because you should have some sort of rule. Mine's simple, it's easy to remember. You don't harm people unless they harm you. But if you want to deviate from that, you should have at least something you could write down and say, okay, this great law or program or system sounds good and it's going to serve the greater good, and here's what I'm willing to do to push that through. Because in economics, we see these voluntary trades between people, and like I said, we see a lot of involuntary action, where we have these situations where someone says, okay, you have to do this law. And all great laws and great ideas and great sounding programs and legislation and regulation, all of them are at the end of the day backed by force. Force is the nature of what government is. That's what government is. Government makes up about 30% of the economy, most of the world. Government is force. Now you can say, what is government? Government builds schools, hospitals, whatever. All of those things can be done by something else. Here's a school that was built without government. But the one, and only one, unique and defining characteristic of government is the ability to do force. The ability for them to kill you, or cage you, or handcuff you. No one else can handcuff you except government. And that's a reality. That's not me talking as somebody who's against government. That's just a reality. It is like recognizing that fire can burn you. Fire can heat your food, fire can heat your home, fire can save your life. Fire can burn you, kill you, and take away everything you have. It doesn't mean you're anti-fire. Fire is a great tool, just like government is a great tool sometimes. But you have to recognize the reality of what it is. You would be a fool to not recognize that fire can burn. And you'd be ignoring the reality of economics and global business and history to ignore that the nature of government is force. Because the greatest and most well-meaning rules and laws are always at the end of the day backed by force and violence. So when you think about your own moral code and what right you have to harm another human, you owe it to yourself to make a system of rules. Because if you rely on others to do it, as the old saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, you just might get there. If you just have a system and hope it's going to be okay, then these well-meaning rules and ideas can end up causing great harm. So if you have an idea to say, here's a great solution, and you look at a way to do it, and government turns out to be the way, you owe it to yourself to say, what level of harm is this worth? Is it worth it if one person goes to jail, or 10? Is it worth it if one person dies, or 10, or 100? So those are questions that may not sound like economic-related questions, but to me they're very much a part of economics, as I've gone around the world and seen the way that different countries treat their people, the way that we treat our people, and in constantly asking this question about what level of freedom do we have? You gain something by recognizing this, because you have, if someone is a bad person, a madman, they may kill a dozen people or 10 people, but a madman at the head of government could kill 10 million people. And it's a great saying. It says, if your ideas are really great, you don't need guns to enforce them. So the core of economics is this free trade. And I always urge people to figure out a way to do things where you don't need guns to enforce things. You don't need violence. You don't need to kill people. In the introduction, I mentioned I was a veteran, and I've been fortunate enough to travel, and I've seen the good and the bad. And in general, overall, throughout the world, the best places are where we have voluntary exchange, free economics, and we let markets and people and individuals decide. Right now, there's this interesting phenomenon of Bitcoin coming along, which could replace a piece of global currency. And the interesting thing about it is that it's this type of currency that completely relies on people deciding the value and trading it amongst themselves, aside from governments. It's a very exciting economic story. And there's been many exciting and interesting things like that that have happened with social media, which has toppled governments, and Facebook and Twitter and the internet itself. When email first came along, people were really worried, and some people who ran post offices were threatened by that. They thought it would be a threat to their power, and in some ways it was. But the greatest things that I've seen in the world are when you have that kind of voluntary cooperation, where you have the ability to trade freely. And some of the worst things I've seen is when you have often well-meaning people, even some members of the Taliban are well-meaning in their own sort of twisted way. I've met members of the Taliban, and I'm the first to tell you that overall there's a great deal of misconceptions about Muslims and Islam, but I'm also first to say that yes, there are members of the Taliban that really are extraordinarily difficult to reason with, and what you may call evil. And sometimes people mean well, but they're just wrong. So that's the other thing. It's worth asking in your own design of your own moral system. You want to say, here are my rules. Here's when I think it's okay to hurt other humans. Here's when I think it's okay to kill them or cage them. And what is the benefit and drawback of that? And then ask yourself 2 more questions. Would I want someone else to have this same power? If your favorite politician has that power, would you want your least favorite politician to have that same power? So, when you have something that is voluntary economics, you have freedom to make that decision. And when you are going through life, a great question to ask yourself is, or sometimes ask out loud, depending on the situation, but when someone tells you to do something, you say to yourself, or else what? Or else what? The coach says, come to practice. You can ask yourself, or else what? Or else you may get kicked off the team. That's good economics. That's freedom. You don't have to be on the team. You don't have to be in this school. That's freedom. You can make those decisions. When someone tells you to do something and the answer is, or else what, and if you lose the argument, they say, I will come to your door with guns, I don't like that. I don't like that idea. And oftentimes, very, very well-meaning people push economic policies. And they only see the rosy, wonderful side of it. So here's all the great things it will do. And I say, or else what? What if I don't like your plan? What if I don't want to do it? Or else what? And sometimes they get uncomfortable because they don't have this moral code that hopefully you can develop. And they get very uncomfortable about admitting that it's forced. I said, what if I don't like, oh, well, we'll send you a letter. And if I rip the letter up, what do you do? Oh, we'll send another one, we'll fine you, and I don't pay your fine. What do you do to me? And in your life, you can ask those questions, and it immediately establishes where that person is coming from. And if it's your coach saying, come to practice, I say that's good economics, that's a good voluntary exchange. I don't have any problem with that. But if that person is saying, you do this or else, and at the end of the day, you're ultimately going to be caged, I don't have a good feeling about that. And you can immediately establish the nature of who that person thinks they are. And sometimes you can ask, again, either to yourself or out loud, who do you think you are? Who are you to have the moral authority to tell me what to do? Who are you to cage me? I mentioned I hate drugs, but I don't feel that I have the moral authority to cage somebody for making a bad decision. I don't have the moral authority, in my opinion, it may be different, in my opinion, to barge into their home and shoot their family dog and put them in a cage. So, the other side of that is something we had the anniversary of 58 years ago this week. Rosa Parks. No matter how well-meaning your rule or regulation, and I think segregation and busing in her days was not well-meaning, but maybe somebody in their twisted way thought it was. So 58 years ago this week, Rosa Parks basically said those great words that humans can say, I refuse. She said, or else what? And she was faced with violence. People said, get to the back of the bus, Rosa. You don't have the right color of skin. And she said, I refuse. Those are powerful words, and they're something that you should think about and ask yourself, because you are future leaders. You are future leaders of this world, and you're going to be in a position to be on the other side of that. And no matter how well-meaning or wonderful something is in your heart, you have to ask, are you willing to harm other humans to do it? The grand plan to save the schools or whatever it may be, are you willing to cage and kill people? Because that's the nature of force. And like I said, it's not a matter of opinion, it's just a matter of recognizing it, just like fire. This school has a history of relations with people in the abolitionist movement, which is, again, a pure example. Fifth Column was named after an abolitionist, and there was other famous people in this movement who went to this school. And they did exactly that. They said, I refuse, and they asked these tough questions. And I think that moral character comes from having this kind of code where you think about these questions, because people aren't thinking about them enough. To think about what is the nature of force, what moral right and authority do you have to harm others. and kind of writing that down and making it something hopefully that's easy enough to remember and simplify. When I learned I was going to come here as a guest, I went on Facebook and asked some of my friends, particularly fellow alums, said, what should I tell the students? And I had 3 or 4 jokes about telling the secret spots that we used to go and get into trouble in. And the rest, overwhelmingly, were all about kind of this concept of challenging conventional wisdom, challenging authority, and challenging what may be out there, and being bold, and being courageous, and being able to be like Rosa Parks and have that courage to say, I refuse. And they've actually done studies on this which show that the people who rise to the occasion are the ones who decide during peace. It's the ones who decide when you're sitting in a chair like this that you will resist tyranny. In the spur of the moment, when someone puts a gun in your face, it's easy to back down. It's easy to go and sit in the back of the bus. But if you decide now, if you say, here's what I'm going to do, here's my own moral code, here's where I will stand in, here's where I will stand for what's right. It doesn't have to be my code, but to have some kind of code, that's what makes character. That's what makes a Rosa Parks, or a Martin Luther King, or any great person in history, and a lot of bad people in history too. They had their own moral code. But at least they had some system. So that was the other thing. People said, you know, tell the students to think about these big picture issues, and think about character, and think about challenging what you hear. You know, in the couple of classes I mentioned about this massive amount of misconceptions. You know, I've been a soldier, and I've been a person who has visited the Middle East as a civilian in peace, and I've seen firsthand that we are being told a great deal of false information about this part of the world. It's designed to create anger and division, and sometimes by well-meaning but ignorant people who want to reinforce images of terrorism and misconceptions, which sometimes are true, but in overall cases is not true. So that's the other valuable lesson, I think, is to kind of think about, as you go through your career in life, to think about where do people get their information, and how do people make decisions, and how can you decide what is true and what is real. Always questioning everything. And I think one of the greatest strengths of this school is that you have that built in by who you are sitting next to your right and left. I see people from all over the world, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, all different kinds of religions and nationalities. And by being exposed to other people, you may question things more. When someone tells you all of this kind of people do this or all of that kind of people do that, you may say, well, wait a minute. I knew somebody at Wilbraham Munson who didn't fall into that mold. I'm going to question it. I'm not going to believe what people may say. I'm going to judge people based on what they are. And it's also about mutual respect. Many, many years later, after graduating, I think there is a healthy mutual respect from people that I know. And I've never seen alums get into a really nasty argument about politics or something. As you can tell, from time to time I say things that are controversial. And I have been known to get in disagreements with people from time to time. But I haven't seen it with my fellow alums, and I think it is because you have a healthy respect, because we have learned to accept, because of our formative years here, we learn to accept people from other nations and nationalities and different types of people, and because we have a common respect for this great institution that we are from. So those are a couple of things. It may be a little bit wide in terms of economics, but if we have time, take some questions. And that's my 2 cents. I hope it's valuable to you. I want to thank you very much.